then Ramon will organize the discussion, right? That's how we agreed on.
Thanks. Thanks again for a very thoughtful presentation and discussion. We expect exactly that. So we have a little time, not a lot of time, but some time for discussion.
So, when you tell this story, first of all, wonderful, wonderful lecture, and we thank you for it. But when you tell this story, which is a kind of suggestion of market failure, and at the early part of it, you talked about recurrent, over long history, examples of failure. Are there regulations that come to mind for the particular situations that you just talked about that you find attractive? Do you have regulatory policy suggestions or just inclinations?
Well, yeah, no, there are certain things that seem obviously. One thing, that leverage has to be regulated. I mean, just as we did this successfully with the stock market. I see no reason why margins, or the parallel to margins, shouldn't be applied to a lot of these other situations. The idea is that if there's a collapse, you see, with collateralized securities, the problem is that there's a cumulative collapse. And that's obvious. I mean, it's not exactly a deeply theoretical point. Once the price gets to the point where you have to sell the collateral, then you're putting downward pressure on the collateral. So you're accumulating the downward pressure on prices, and therefore the prices can go down just as not because it's desired, but because it's necessary to meet legal obligations. And you have a multiplier. The Lyapunov exponent greater than 1, as the complex system theorists would call it. That you get instability, you get this instability out of the leverage. So that seems to be clear. The second thing is I like all of this to be. You can't go to 100% marketization. By the way, there clearly are contracts. People are making one-to-one deals, which you can't sort of imagine being part of it. But I think as much as possible, credit default swaps can, if they're to be tolerated at all, which I'm somewhat doubtful, but to the extent they exist, they should be, there should be market. You should, instead of having personalized contracts, you have to have a standard contract, and then you translate market. Then you know there's a price. The price of a credit default swap on GM is General Motors is so and so. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows the volume at hand. There's also the argument. Many of the arguments put forth classically for the market are violated. I mean, even the most simplest things, like the idea that everybody knows the price. I mean, that's you think that's one of the more elementary properties of things, because then, after all, the idea is that the terms to trade should be the same for everybody. That's the basic principle, and the argument, therefore, is that they should be announcing these things. Yeah, so I would certainly require that. I don't think you go to 100%, but that many of these things be put to a market, so that it should be like a futures market and not an individual transaction. There's something behind this, but I don't know. This is not a question of regulation. The size of the financial services industry has ballooned. Now, financial services, we think of something which helps facilitate profits. We got something like 40% of all corporate profits were in the financial sector. It used to be 10, and not many years ago. This is all of a very rapid change. I mean, like if you went back to 1990, I'm not talking about something. The thing has just gone up enormously, and it's partly the manufacture of these new processes. Now, there's an arms race question here, as they use the expression. In competition between two species, the biologists frequently use the term arms race. The idea is that one develops something, let's say a prey predator. The predator develops some edge, the prey develops some way out of it, evolves. Well, that happens with these financial institutions. The regulations of the 30s are fine. Just what they've done is invent around them. So there'll always be a problem. I'm sure no matter what we do, somebody's going to come up with some way which complies with those rules, but no, we didn't think of it. But that's all right if you have a sufficiently alert public sector and you don't have an ideology which says public sector is bad. The British are going even further than that, the Americans, by the way, to make London the great center. It seems to me at some point you should be getting some economic edge by selling quality. If it's registered with us, you know it's good. You know? So it shouldn't be a dead loss, even from the practical point of view. But anyway, yeah, I think we certainly can talk about making credit default swaps. They're not enforceable unless they're on a market. That I think is straightforward. I mean, somebody invents something a way out of that, but look, it takes time. Okay. But leverage requirements. The Basel III sort of thing is in the right direction already. You know, if you go back, by the way, there are several very eminent economists in the past who argued for 100% banking. In those days, the banking run was the equivalent. The bank run was the equivalent to this. Irving Fisher, Maurice Allais, who are both, after all, reasonably, both were very concerned by this issue and thought you should have 100%. The bank is just a place where you deposit. Now, the economic advantages of saying idle cash should be used are very considerable too, right? But they do produce this instability. So the idea is leverage. I'm not saying 100%, you know, but 2% or 3% is going too far the other direction.
Let me ask you a question. I don't see. Psychologists study this issue about people moving step by step, and everything seems reasonable step by step. But then, of course, when you put them together, it's not. And then many times they can explain corruption of behavior, many times of behavior. And Jared Diamond uses this kind of psychologist ideas when he talks about catastrophes and so on, which for us seems like we have the Euler equation, but not the dynamic programming. Okay? Yeah. And I think that this is something that if we look at the crisis, I think that something is there, and what you were saying about perceptions at the beginning, in the sense that a lot of people in Greece or in Spain or something say, we're not doing anything unreasonable. I mean,
well, in Spain you have a better case than most other places.
Yeah, but I mean, so you look at a lot of things and say there's nothing specifically unreasonable, and then of course when you put them all together, and that's why they create these sudden collapses or sudden big changes when you realize all what you had accumulated, for example, on private debt or something. Is this kind of thing that you are dealing?
Yes, well, the way I'd like to put it, I mean, just put it in everyday language, which is not technical, is that if you're on a mountain in a fog, you don't necessarily want to, and you look at the map, there's the shortest path, but it has a cliff on one side. You don't want to take that path. You have to allow, of course, I mean, you have to allow for the fact that things aren't going to work out the way you said. Now, that's tricky. I was holding myself back by insisting we use a probability calculus. My view is that most of the really serious problems can still be handled within a probability. The possibility of a catastrophe can still be incorporated even with a probabilistic things, because there are certain times you start an avalanche, and this is that's the equivalent of a stock market collapse. So if when the leverage rates are low, it's clear it's conceivable. I forget which is the leverage, which is the haircut, but anyway, whatever. If the amount the person puts up, the initiator puts up is very small, then it doesn't take much error in your calculation to put things. And you can see, because of the leverage, you can see the possibility of collapse. So I think if you got to have a thing which says that you simply don't allow yourself to get in a situation where it's close. I think the rigorous idea of marking to market, by the way, that's admittedly marking to market is a construct, it's not a fact, but nevertheless, it's a healthy discipline instead of using historical costs. It's a discipline. So I think the answer is you got and of course what you actually put in those bills is going to depend on your history. Of course, you're going to guard yourself against the errors that have already occurred, not the ones that nobody's ever seen. But I don't think you do much, better than that. But I think you have to imagine what could happen, And okay, I think it's a fair point that you have to allow for the fact that, and I think in fact, if you take your ordinary error analysis seriously, you know, these value at risk considerations, if you look at the indices they use, they're very strange. They're not at all. They don't really represent what you intuitively think they're supposed to represent. They don't. It's something like the probability of exceeding some critical point, but it makes a great difference how far you're exceeding that. You can't, failure proof, of course, impossible. Now, failure proof is may be impossible. In any case, it's undesirable. You want failure. You want successes, and you only get big successes by allowing. But you want to pose some kind of a restraint on that. And I think that increase capital requirements, things like that can prevent this from happening. We did very well for what, 40? No, more than that. 60, 65 years. We did, well, no, about 55 years. We already had a couple of booms which were dangerous. The so-called dot-com bubble. Didn't work out too badly. In fact, the people who think government action is bad say it was the attempt to mitigate the dot bubble that caused the Greenspan kept the rates down too low. But I was struck when I heard Greenspan talk at the time of the dot-com bubble should we do anything about bubbles? No, because we don't know it's a bubble. When it collapses, then we have all the instruments, and all the instruments meant one instrument, meant the short-term rate of interest. We have an instrument which we can clear it up, and that's exactly what he did do, and it did clear up the dot-com bubble. Some people will tell me, my colleague John Taylor will tell me that that's the cause of the housing bubble. I'm not convinced. I seem to be the two fair. But in any case, the question, the idea that you need more, put it another way. Remember the old Tinbergen argument? You need as many instruments as you have objectives. Well, the short-term interest rate controls some things. The short-term interest rate does not control housing. That's a long-term rate of interest. You have to assume an awful lot about the short-term rate of interest controlling the long-term, which I think is false empirically, to assume that you don't need a separate set of controls for the long-term rate of interest. That's another way of putting it. Look, there's nothing perfection. One problem, of course, is that you're introducing a new decision maker, and the government, the Federal Reserve, and maybe the other aspects of government, and they could be wrong too. You know? But I think we have to have a multiplicity of decision makers.
Well, thanks a lot again for your talk. I mean, we could be just talking and talking, so but maybe we can move to have a cava. And thank again the Bank of Sabadell for allowing us to have here the.